So next up, we've got Gemma. Welcome, Gemma.
So I'm Gemma. For those of you that have not met me before, I am a nurse practitioner by background, initially started in paediatrics. I am the founder of Essence, which is an aesthetics clinic, and last year I left the NHS and literally took a big leap of faith and set up a brand new business that I left the NHS for, which was Essence Wellness. And I have also in the middle of soft launching a third business this year. So basically I went from having a bit of a side hustle to having 3 businesses. So it was a little bit about how that journey happened and how you can kind of upskill if it's something that you don't just want as a side hustle and you are planning on leaving the NHS. So I thought it was probably a little bit important to tell you a little bit about my own personal story, because that's probably where it came from. So I always wanted to be a nurse. It was something that I always knew from like this big, you know, from dressing up, and it never ever left me. And I can't tell you why at that point. I just always wanted to be a nurse. So I've been doing that for 20 years now, qualified in 2005. I've had lots of ups and downs in the road. I went through a very messy divorce. I won't bore you with the details, but it was an abusive relationship. I was a single parent. I've had multiple miscarriages, both with my first husband and my current husband. Suffered with postnatal depression, anxiety. I have been very mismanaged by the NHS. I'm not NHS bashing. I worked in it for a long time. It's absolutely amazing. But I think there's lots of different ways to do things, as Cheryl's rightly pointed out with skin health. I was misdiagnosed before my endometriosis. I've had lots of surgeries. I was mismanaged and menopause was missed. And I get it, I'm 42. I was diagnosed as menopause at age 38, which is really young, but I'd been backwards and forwards to the GP for a long, long time before it was even considered, even though I was telling them it was all cycle related. And then I had a full hysterectomy, including my ovaries, back in 2023, which I'd known a bit about functional health and where I am with my own wellness business today. I possibly wouldn't have made that decision. However, I have rebuilt. I've got a very strong marriage, and my husband is co-owner of our Essence Wellness, mostly because we use joint finances. Actually, I manage and run it and do everything day to day. Bit about my professional background is I qualified in 2005. I did the typical thing, you know, qualified, got married, bought a house, had a baby, and I did all of that typical thing. But qualified in 2005, and because of what was going on in my personal life, which is why I thought it was important to mention it, I actually went to work in a GP practice, and I wouldn't have chose to do that at that point. It was because actually I needed it for a childcare point of view, because I was a single mum, and while my mum was very, very great with me, I was really struggling for childcare. So like that was, he could go to nursery basically. However, it wasn't the greatest idea at the time. It was a health promotion role that I went for, but it wasn't a health promotion role that I did. I was very much working as a very cheap nurse practitioner without all of the skills of a nurse practitioner at the time. However, they were very, very supportive, and I went on to do my nurse practitioners in that role, independent prescribing. And then after my independent prescribing, so during that course, some of you might have met Sarah from SLA Aesthetics. She was actually on my independent prescribing course, and I suffered with acne for many, many years, and I could always find skin things that would help to settle it down, but nothing that would ever prevent it. And again, talking about the functional health, we now know a lot more about that. And Sarah introduced me to a brand called Illumia, and that was kind of where my aesthetics came from. But I thought, well, nobody's going to buy Illumia from me, and nobody's going to come to me as a nurse for skincare and skin treatments, because I thought at that time it was very much a beautician type thing. So I went in to do my side hustle as Botox and fillers, but I called my business Gemma Michelle Skin Aesthetics. I plucked the name kind of out of thin air, put skin in there because I knew I wanted it to be skin focused, and started my business. And right at the start, I can't tell you that it was very successful. I maybe seeing one person like a week, I maybe seeing a couple of patients 1 month, and I used to think, oh God, is this really worth it? And then we got to 2020, and obviously everything shut down. Now, I was already doing skin, and I did pivot my business, and I still showed up on socials, which I'll come to a bit further on. But the pandemic actually rocketed my business, and that is where it actually took off for me. 2021 I rebranded to Essence because I actually sometimes felt embarrassed by Gemma Michelle Skin Aesthetics. I think, and I do apologise if anybody's ever done this or still has this, but I think what we tend to do is we just tend to put our name and put aesthetics behind it, and it really wasn't who I was. I left the NHS in 2024, and that was like literally we left, and I was building that business at the same time as I was leaving. And then this year we've launched another business called BioNuvu, where we are a supplier of red light therapy beds and panels. You don't need to know the whole path to take the first step, is what I would say. I started out of my house. I actually started out of my living room when I very first started, feeling a little bit unprofessional, but I just get started. And yeah, that's the thing, is just start. It doesn't matter where you start, just start. We've all been there, we've all done it. What I would say is goal set right from the start. So while it was a side hustle and I didn't really ever intend for it to be anything else, I also knew by 5 years I wanted to work less hours in the NHS. I was doing 30 hours and I wanted to do 2 days NHS, 2 days aesthetics. And I actually met that goal. And the other thing was my husband really wanted his baby toy car. It's a Focus RS. He had missed out on it from family and stuff like that. And I said, we'll do it by 5 years. And he got his Focus RS. It's sitting on our drive, his little toy car, extra to our 2 other cars that we have. So goal setting, I think, is really important. And you don't have to do them goals by 5 years or 2 years or 10 years, but goal setting and revisiting them. Right at the start, I made no money from it. I reinvested everything. And the whole reason for setting up was so that we could have like little luxuries, holidays, weekends away. That was the whole point, was for it to pay for our lifestyle, basically. And in the first 2 years, it paid for nothing because it all just went back in. So it felt like you were working for absolutely nothing. However, I did pay for us to go on a family holiday to Florida. We actually went to New York and Florida a month before the pandemic. So I did set out with the goals I had, and we did achieve them. And then when I said earlier about pivoting, so that's where my business probably did pivot, because in the pandemic, when you couldn't be open and treating patients, I did put more of a focus, because I already had the skin coming through the business. I did put more of a focus on skin plans. And I don't know whether it was because people had more money, they had more time, whatever, but I did pick up quite a lot of patients during that period of lockdown that I was treating successfully online, that then came to me when we reopened. And I literally, when we reopened in July 2020, I'd never been as busy. I was working 1 full day a week, and before that I could have maybe just done 1 or 2 days a month. So it is about trying to not be in focus, and this is the end goal, like looking, and if you do need to change your direction, change your tack, then go with it. And again, I think when we've worked in the NHS and then you have your own business, literally you are everybody. You're the injector, you're the marketer, you're the accountant, you're like, you literally do every single job in your business. And I think it's about sometimes looking at where can we outsource? Is there somebody else that can do that for us? And sometimes the question isn't, can I afford this? It's, can I afford not to? And I speak a lot about my accountant when we're talking about this. So while I had an accountant really early on, she's always done my tax returns for me. It wasn't until we set up Essence Wellness last year, she was the first person I went to talk to, and she gave me lots of help and advice, and she supported me through the last 12 months. And she now actually does my bookkeeping for me, because I was doing it for 2 businesses. She does my bookkeeping for me, and I now get a profit and loss at the end of every month. And do you know what? thought that has been invaluable and an absolute game changer for me, because you can see where your money's going, you can see where you need to focus on. So yeah, could I afford to do that? No, I couldn't. But actually, because I have done it, it's made that there's actually more financial assets in the business that she can help me with. So I definitely would sometimes ask that question. So when you begin your side hustle, you're working to suit your patients. Somebody says to you, oh, can I come at Friday night, 9 o'clock? And you're like, yeah, please do. You know, seriously, I never did that. But you know what I mean? You're just really grateful that somebody wants to come and see you. And I think we lose sight of our boundaries like really quickly because you're just so grateful. And we're then also, most of us, probably working around our NHS roles, working around family, and you're trying to have a life. You're trying to like look after your kids, run a house, run a business, and still do sometimes a full-time job. And do you know, it's hard work. It's really, really hard work. And I don't know about you guys, but imposter syndrome, I mean, I still feel this. I've, you know, like standing up here, I'm like, who am I to be standing up here talking to other people? But actually, again, we just talking earlier on, sometimes it's really important to go back to where you started from, because I've been doing this for 7 years, and 7 years ago, I wouldn't have ever dreamt that I wouldn't not be in the NHS and I would be running 3 businesses. So it is normal for us to have imposter syndrome, and I think any of us that do work in the NHS, apologies, I know that there's some that haven't come from that clinical background, but the injecting is the easy bit, you know, we learn how to do all this stuff. Running a business is like one of the hardest things that I've ever had to learn how to do. And when we talk about all them hats that you wear when you're the person in your business, and I think marketing is the hardest one. And what I would say is just follow the industry experts. So like back in the early days, I would attend every free video, every free webinar, and they all say the same thing: post this many times a day, use this many hashtags, use this hashtag, do this. And you know what, if it was that easy, like we'd all have like proper rip-roaring businesses and followers. But following industry experts, the likes of Hannah Russell, who owns Glowday, Claire, I need to mention Claire because obviously learn a lot from, yeah.
I don't do our social media, but I'm sure Danielle and Paulina would be delighted.
But there's a lot, do you know, there is a lot to learn from it. I've worked with Richard Crawford Small, I've worked with Vanessa Bird, Rick O'Neill. There's a lot of people out there and they give such a lot of free value. You don't have to pay. I mean, I have worked with all of them in some way, shape or form. And I've learned something different from them all. And sometimes I think that we invest a lot of money in our clinical stuff and not as much in the business. And I think that it is quite important to do that. If you haven't got a Google My Business, it's definitely something that you should go away and you should do, because as service-based businesses, the majority of people are going to find you probably from Google or social, and you can have the two connected, but important to do your Google My Business and follow the steps for it. And networks, there's a lot to be said about networks, and that is on a wide sense, like from peers and professionals, but even local business groups. So when I've left the NHS, one of the first things I did was I've joined several local business groups to us, and they have been invaluable for support, from financial to referrals. There's all sorts of things that, like, from a business perspective, like, I'm not a business, well, obviously I am, but you know, when I left, I was like, I don't know how to do this, and they are really, really invaluable for support. But we need to look at our mindset. And I think it's really important because you've got to look after you first. Not comparing yourself to others, especially people down the road that are offering like cheap Botox for £100 for 3 areas. Not also comparing yourself to industry experts that have been doing it for years and years and years, because actually, like, we can look up to these people, use them as peer support, but don't compare yourself to other people. And stay in your own lane. So this was something like, again, not comparing yourself to somebody who is a non-medic down the road that is treating people very differently to you and probably has a different target market. And even the professionals who are in your area, we all tend to have very different target markets. So it's important, you know, just stay focused on what you want for you and for your business. And I think pricing is something. So back in the early days, when I was first setting up, and I put some adverts out on Facebook before I actually knew what I was doing, and I got loads of different inquiries, especially when you're doing model prices and how much for 3 areas and a miller filler. And I would tell them, and it was my price for 3 areas of Botox and a miller filler. And it was like, well, last time I got it done, they did it for this much because I had them both. And I was like, yeah, no problem. Like, off you go. And I've always stuck to my guns from that point of view. I'm not saying I've never done discounts, but I've done them when they've suited me and not when somebody has asked for them. I had a patient that come to me, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, and she was one of the very first people that I actually did like a full treatment plan for. And she went away and she booked in for a couple of treatments off this full treatment plan. And she got home, so she booked in, she got home and she messaged me and she said, seeing as though I'm getting these 2 treatments, she said, can you do me a discount? And I was like, oh, I went, no. And I thought I would have lost her. And you know what? I still treat her to this day. And she actually told me the other day that when she came to me, she'd actually contacted somebody before me who was going to come to a house. She didn't have to have a consultation for her Botox treatment. She was just going to come to the house and do it. And for her, it rang red flags, thankfully. But for some people, they'd have been, oh, yeah, great, I don't have to have a consultation. But, you know, so, yeah, I've always priced quite top of for the area that we live in. I've always been fairly near the top or the top for that. And I make no apologies for it. And I've built a successful business doing it. And I think sometimes people are frightened to do that. And I also think trying to compete with others, it just brings the prices down, and actually it devalues what we are. And the majority of us are medical professionals and we are given medical treatments and we should price it as such. And again, setting your boundaries. So this comes down to, what hours do you work? When would you answer messages? What's your time? And we all do it. You know, even now, I still sometimes answer messages first thing in the morning. You're more likely to get them. I'm more of a morning person than a night person. So you're more likely to get a message back from me at 5:30 in the morning than you would at midnight. But it's having them boundaries so that your patients clearly know what the boundaries are. And if you go outside them, that's fine, but you're doing it when it suits you as opposed to when it suits them. So basically, I went on a business course a couple of years ago with a few other nurses from the NHS, and we all sat there at the start of this business course and went, what's your goals? And my goals were still to have less NHS, but I was never ever leaving the NHS. It was definitely not on my radar to do. And everybody was like, I want to have my notice in, I want to do this, and I wasn't. And basically, when I rebranded in 2021-22, I rebranded with Essence and a sub-logo of Essence Wellness. Now, at the time, Essence Wellness looked very, very medical-fied. I was looking at doing menopause services, I was looking at doing weight loss services, and I wanted it to be all-encompassing of health and well-being. However, at the back end of 2023, I wanted to do more holistic type stuff, and I wanted it to be more holistic meets medical, and it came from the idea of a flotation tank. And within 2 or 3 weeks of having that idea, I then moved to having meetings about finance, how I was going to finance it, because I didn't have money to finance it at all. And I'd done a business plan, and this is it. So it happened very quickly. I was planning not to still leave the NHS at this point, I must add. I was going to work in the wellness clinic, I was going to work in the aesthetics clinic, and I was going to do my NHS job. I mean, how the hell I thought I was going to do it all, I've got no idea. We actually had 2 premises before we got this one. And they both fell through for different reasons. But in that time, after having a conversation with my accountant, I realised that I was going to have to leave the NHS, and it was a bit of a sad decision. It's the best decision I've ever made, but it was a bit, I cried the day I made that decision. I mean, I literally cried buckets, but It's the best decision. But basically, while we were doing this, we've got 4 floors in the building that we're currently in. This is part of one of the floors, and this was us doing it out. And while we were doing it, I was still working in my aesthetics business. I was project managing the refurb of this, and I was working in the NHS. And I was like, when I look back now, I have absolutely no idea how I actually did it, because it was such a roller coaster. But like I say, it was definitely the best thing I ever done. And from that business, when we don't always look back at our achievements, so in the last few years, I have set that business up. I have grown it bigger than what my aesthetics business is today. Within 2 weeks of working in that business, which was just me initially, I hired a clinic assistant and a cleaner. We've just took on our second clinic assistant as well. So I have grown it really quickly. We were finalists in the Health and Wellbeing Awards earlier this year, and I have recently been awarded Influential Businesswoman of the Year for the clinic. And it is, thank you. So it has been a roller coaster, and I think it is sometimes really important to step back and look and go, do you know what? I actually did that. And me 7 years ago would be really proud. Me now goes, right, yeah, what's next? And like, oh God, I don't feel like I'm doing this very well. And this is where the imposter syndrome comes in, and you're like, I don't know how to be a business person. Well, quite clearly I do, because I've quite successfully grown this. While we were doing our Essence Wellness Clinic, I wanted to introduce red light therapy bed into it. And I spent hours upon hours upon hours researching red light therapy beds. I spoke to multiple different companies. And in the end, I actually sourced it direct from the manufacturer myself. So while we were doing Essence Wellness, we actually decided that we were going to set up this supply company for red light therapy. We drafted it, we put it to the side, because actually doing 2 businesses was quite enough. So this year we're just in the middle of soft launching this at the minute. It feels a lot less risky, because our Essence Wellness business, when I tell you that we put every single penny we had and some into that, we had to beg, borrow and steal towards the end to get it over the line. This one has got low setup costs for us. But now I'm juggling 3 different businesses. I'm trying to delegate some of this to my husband, that while I tell you he is very supportive, he keeps telling me, I can't do that. He does have a job as well. He is still working. But yeah, and this business came off the back of that. And I sometimes think, once you set up a business, you think, I haven't got any business ideas. But they're like literally just like pop off your head. And you're like, and some of them are great, some of them are not so great. So yeah, that's where we're at with business number 3. And I think to scale, it's really important to change your mindset from nurse to CEO. And that's something that I have found much easier since I've left the NHS. It's like, because I think when you're in the NHS, it's free at the point of contact. So sometimes it feels it hasn't felt wrong for a long time, but I can remember right in the early days of running a business, it felt like, oh God, taking money off people, like, oh, don't really do this, but it does require a different mindset shift. And I actually have different clothes for different days of the week. So when I am an aesthetics nurse, I wear my scrubs. I'm clinical, and that's mostly what I do, maybe with a bit of business thrown in little gaps. When I'm covering for some of the staff in the clinic, we've got hoodies that we wear in the clinic as our uniform. That's what I wear because I'm covering in the Essence Wellness Clinic. When I'm managing the clinic, which I mostly am now when I'm not being a nurse, I wear very similar to this. And it's really helped me get into gear of what hat am I wearing today, because I do still wear multiple hats. And we have to get over this mindset. Like, I think, again, as nurses, we've been brought up with this ethical and moral and what's this and what's that. Your business has got to be profitable, because if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable, and it won't be there in 5 years' time. And to scale up, obviously, it needs to still be patient focused or customer focused, as it is in our wellness side of the business. But you need to have systems and processes in place that actually, my end goal is not to be working in that side of the business. That side of the business will almost help and work for itself, but I need them systems and processes in place ready to be able to hand that over to somebody else. And again, being what's operational and what's organisational. So your operational is your day-to-day stuff, but actually you need to step out of that and be the CEO, and you need to be doing things that is going to move that business forward into the next bracket. So final thoughts to take away. Growth is messy. It's really messy. You're not always going to get it right. It's not always going to be the right decision. That's okay. And you will have this roller coaster, and it will be up and down. Imposter syndrome is normal, and I think it's what makes us human and what makes us sort of in that caring industry that we're in. Boundaries, I think I've learned, I mean, I left the NHS because I wanted a bit more work-life balance. I probably haven't got as much of that at the minute as what I would like, but I know that there's an end goal. But equally, I remember, like, so last year we hadn't long opened, and my son had some, I don't know, it was a parents' evening or an open day or something, and I closed the business early, and it was when there was just me at the time, and my husband said, "You can't shut it," and I was like, "Why?" And he went, "Because we've just started," and he says, "And we need people to come," and I was like, "Yeah, it's my business," and it's like, and this is why I did it. And it's like making sure that you've got those boundaries in place, because boundaries are actually freedom, because otherwise you are just constantly attached to your phone, answering messages at your customer, your patient's beck and call. And build as you go. Comes back, you don't need to know exactly where you're going. 7 years ago, I definitely didn't think I was going here. It's okay, just keep on going, change, pivot, whatever you need to do in that business, it's okay. Thank you.
Questions? No?
Nope.
What is next? If you've got lots, if you want to share any ideas with
So
us.
do you know what? I actually, we've just had this conversation in the car on the way down, don't we? And I actually don't know. I feel a little bit lost at the moment, because last year I manifested my clinic, and I manifested it hard. It looks like it did in my head, and I worked so hard at it, and now I've got that. The thing for me is freedom. I want to be able to step away from the business. I want to be able to have more time, and it's kind of working on the steps that's going to be able to help me do that, and trying to figure that out. And that's what I'm saying. It's okay not to have it figured out, because actually I don't.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.